بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاه. Then we'll continue with that which we started from the book أنوار البيان في دروس شهر رمضان. And we started yesterday lesson 3, which was a lesson or a dars madrasatul ikhlas, madrasatun fil ikhlas, or how the month of Ramadan is like a school for teaching us sincerity. And we talked about how the month of Ramadan, it teaches us sincerity for Allah Azza wa Jal, and had to be sincere of our worship of Him alone. And we talked about this being the case based on the fact that Allah Azza wa Jal, He is the only one besides ourselves who know if we're fasting or not. So this act of sawm or fasting is something that Allah Azza wa Jal alone is aware of. So this is from the acts that the servant is completely sincere for Allah in them. وَلِذَلِكَ قَالَ النَّبِيُّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ, and for that reason the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, he said, كُلُّ عَمَلٍ بِنِي آدَمْ لَهُ إِلَّا الصِّيَامِ فَإِنَّهُ لِي وَأَنَا أَجْزِي بِهِ. The Prophet said that every act of the child of Adam is for his own self, except fasting, for it belongs to me and I give the reward for it. So this month of Ramadan is a month that teaches us sincerity in our worship of Allah Azza wa Jal. And we talked about the importance of sincerity and the value of ikhlas was based on the fact that that is what Allah Azza wa Jal considers from His servants. When we ask ourselves, what does Allah pay attention to, or what we should say, what does Allah look at from the servant? Does He look at his money, how much he has? Does He look at his property, how much he owns? Does He look at his clothing, his physical nature? Of course, the answer to this is no. Allah doesn't look at any of these things. Instead, Allah looks at the sincerity of the individual which is in his heart. For that reason, Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَنْظُرُ إِلَى صُوَرِكُمْ وَأَمْوَالِكُمْ وَإِنَّمَا يَنْظُرُ إِلَى قُلُوبِكُمْ وَأَعْمَالِكُمْ. Allah doesn't look at your shapes or your money. Instead, He looks at your hearts and your actions. Ikhlas, it's partially that, how much you believe in Him, but it's also how much you make the action for Him. For example, you're sitting in the class right now. Why are you sitting in the class? Are you sitting in the class because the masjid has air conditioning and it's cooler in here than it is outside, and it's a class? Or are you sitting in the class because it's a class? Or are you sitting in the class only because it's air conditioned? Or are you sitting in the class because the brother is sitting in the class next to you and you don't want him to say that Muhammad didn't come to the class? All of these things change how sincere you are in your action. So you believe in Allah in all of these situations, but the reason or the driving force behind why you do this action, which could be the same action, is based on your sincerity, what's inside your heart. So both of you all four of you all are doing the same thing, but you all have different reasons for doing it. And these different reasons is what Allah considers from your action. So maybe you all do the same action, but one of you get more reward from the other. Is it because one of you looks better? Is it because one of you has more money? Or one of you is from a better tribe? We say, la. The reason why one of you might get more reward from the other is because Allah looks at what's in your heart. And what's in the heart of one of you might be different from the heart of the other. And for this reason, the Sahaba, they used to say about Abu Bakr, radiallahu anhu, that he wasn't better than us because of how much salat and how much fasting he did. Right? Abu Bakr, you might make more salat than Abu Bakr. You might pray more than Abu Bakr. It's not hard to do. You might fast more than Abu Bakr. But it is not the reason of salat and fasting that made Abu Bakr better than us. What made Abu Bakr better than us was what was inside his heart. That sidq, that ikhlas, that truthfulness and sincerity for Allah. Likewise, the Khawarij, they do actions the Prophet ﷺ said about them, تَحْقِرُونَ صَلَاتِكُمْ إِلَى صَلَاتِهِمْ وَقِرَاءَتِكُمْ إِلَى قِرَاءَتِهِمْ يَمْرُقُونَ مِنَ الدِّينِ كَمَا يَمْرُقُ السَّهْمَ مِنَ الرَّمِيَّةِ. Allah's Messenger said about the Khawarij, you consider your salat to be small compared to what they pray. And you consider your recitation of the Quran to be small compared to the way they recite. لا يتجاوز it doesn't pass taraqi, it doesn't pass their hanajiruhum, their throats, right? They'll go out of the religion the same way the arrow goes out of the animal that you shot it. So you check it to see if there's any flesh or blood on it. Meaning they did stuff more than we do stuff. But because what was in their heart was deficient, their actions were deficient. And so this is the reason why we say that it's important that we learn sincerity, and Ramadan is the month to teach us sincerity, because this is what Allah considers from our actions. And we also talked about last class how this sincerity or this intention, this pure intention that we have, can be the cause for having more actions. So for example, an individual can't make hijrah, right? I want to go live in Saudi Arabia. I want to go live in Kuwait, right? But I can't do it. But I have a sincere reason for Allah to want to do that. I want to live in Saudi Arabia so I can live around a scholar so I can benefit from it. Allah will give me the reward as if I did that, based on the sincerity of this intention. For that reason, the Prophet ﷺ, he said in the hadith, لا هجرة بعد الفتح ولكن جهاد ونية. There's no making hijrah after the conquest of Mecca. Meaning for the companions who lived in Mecca, after they conquered Mecca, there was no more hijrah from Mecca to Medina because Mecca was a Muslim country. But the Messenger said, but there's still jihad and intention. So you can still make jihad like they made before the conquest, even though those who did it before were better. And you can still make the intention that had I been a Muslim, or if hijrah becomes obligatory, I'll do it. And so Allah gives you the reward for that. So this is the importance or the value of sincerity. Likewise, from the value of this sincerity and this intention is that Allah Azza wa Jal makes your customs and your habits and the actions that you do anyway, He makes them acts of worship. So for example, when we get up, all of us, we put on our clothes. But when we put on our clothes and we make the dua, and we consider the fact that I'm wearing clothes sincerely for the sake of Allah to cover myself, as Allah commanded me when He said, oh, you have iman, take your decoration to every masajid. Right? Oh, ya ayyuhalladhina amanu khudhu zinatakum inda kulli masajid. Right? Oh, you have iman, wear your decorations at every masjid. These things, Shaykh, okay. These things that we do anyway, with the sincere intention, Allah turns it from custom into worship. So the individual goes away with mountains of reward. I brush my teeth before I go to bed, right? I tell my kids to brush their teeth before they go to bed. For what reason? So their breath can smell good and their teeth won't fall out? Okay, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if I teach them a reason that the religion can apply for that, for example, that the Messenger ﷺ, he said about miswak, or siwak, هو مطهرة للفم ومرضاة للرب. I'm sorry, Umar said about the siwak, هو مرضاة للرب ومطهرة للفم, that it makes Allah happy and it purifies your mouth. So that I teach my children to brush their teeth for this reason, then it becomes worship. Making up their bed at night. Everybody makes up their bed before they get in it. But if I'm making up my bed for the reason that the Prophet ﷺ encouraged us that before we get in our bed at night that we shake it out and wipe it down, then now this act that I was going to do anyway becomes worship and I get rewarded for it. So by constantly considering and thinking about the sincerity of why you're doing your actions for the sake of Allah, it can not only give you the reward for an action that you didn't get the chance to do, but it can turn actions that you were going to do anyway into acts of worship. We talked about also in the last class that the intention is so important that it is what considers or what makes the servant a true servant of Allah, the sincerity inside. Because sometimes when we're around people we act one way, but when we're away from the people we act a different way. Or when we're away from certain people we act a different way. But if I make my sincerity inwardly, the same way as my actions are openly, then this is what qualifies me to be considered from the true servants of Allah Azza wa Jal. And we talked about the effort that the Salaf put in their sincerity, and this was in the fact that they used to conceal their actions. So they would conceal their righteous actions from one another, and in order to not allow their sincerity to be put to a test. Because the more people know about your righteous actions, the more likely that showing off and becoming popular will enter into your actions. So an individual might start off praying for the sake of Allah, but when a particular person comes, he makes his qira'ah better, or he makes his sujood longer. When he's at home and he's praying Fajr at the house, he prays Qul Huwallahu Ahad all the time. But when he goes to the masjid and he leads the people, now he wants to make the salah long. This is something that could affect the sincerity of a person. So it's necessary, or should we say, so the way the Salaf were, was that they would conceal their acts of righteousness from the people to protect them from showing off. And then lastly, yesterday we talked about the fact that although the Salaf used to conceal their actions, that it's not automatically a fault if you talk about your actions. As long as it's done not out of pride or arrogance or being astonished or pleased with oneself, talking about how good you are. But instead, if a person shows off their action for benefit, like for example, to encourage others to do it, then this is something that is good. If a person gives charity openly, so that other people will be encouraged to give charity. Muhammad's the leader of the community. And when people see Muhammad giving charity, they're going to say, well, Muhammad's doing it, I got to do it too. Then we say that this is a good way to show off your action. And it's not destroying your action to show it off in this fashion. Likewise, if a person talks about their action as a way of talking about the blessing of Allah upon them. So for example, they say, Alhamdulillah, who allowed us to make salat last night. This is a way of talking about the blessings of Allah. So these are what we talked about yesterday regarding sincerity and intention. We'll continue with the statement of the author. فقال المؤلف رحمه الله والإنسان أبصر بسريرته من غيره فإذا تعبد لله وقصد وجهه فإن الشيطان يوسوس له ليبطل عبادته من جهة القصد فيوقعه في الرياء أو يوسوس للمخلص أنه مرائي حتى يدع العمل فالمؤمن في جهد وبلاء مع شيطان فليجرد العمل لله وليدحر وسواس الشيطان ولا يدع العمل. The author says, so talking about the struggle between showing off your action or allowing your actions to be seen and keeping them hidden, and the reasons behind that and the struggle that it comes with. You know, if people walk in on me, should I continue to do my action or should I stop it? People walk in on me while I'm praying. My friend comes to my house and I'm making salat and I want to keep my actions secret. When my friend comes in, should I stop praying or should I keep praying? Right? The author, he says that the individual is more aware about his inward self or his secret nature than other than him. So when a person is worshiping Allah, let that be his main focus. And let the pleasure of Allah in doing actions for the sake of Allah be his main intent. For indeed the shaitan will whisper to an individual in order to get him to stop doing an action or to nullify his action from the aspect of his intention. So you're making salat and the shaitan will whisper for you, you might as well stop praying because you know you're not praying for the sake of Allah. You're praying because your friend just came in and you don't want him to see it, so you might as well stop. So the shaitan will whisper to him in order to nullify his action of worship and corrupt his intention. And so this can occur by the shaitan leading him into showing off. So the shaitan might say to him something like, such and such walked in, you should make your qira'ah better. You should make the way you make your ruku better. You should make your action better because such and such is looking at you now. And this will lead you into showing off. Or the opposite. He might give whispers to the person who is sincere that, oh, you might as well stop because now you're showing off. Come on, why are you praying so long? You shouldn't pray that long. The people behind you, you're showing off. Even though the individual was sincere. So the shaitan will come at you from two ways. One, by making you insincere in an action, or by making you think that you're being insincere in that action. All with the goal of making you try to stop and abandon that action. So for that reason, the author, he says that the believer is always in a state of fighting and trial with his shaitan. You're always struggling against your shaitan. So when it comes to worship, how should we be? Should we keep everything hidden from the people? Should we talk about everything we do? How should we be regarding our worship? The way that the individual should be regarding his worship is that he should only consider Allah. So when you're doing something for Allah, if people find out you're doing it, it doesn't matter. And if nobody finds out you're doing it, it doesn't matter. Because you did the action for the sake of Allah to begin with. So let the person strip down his action to make it only for Allah's sake. And let him push away the whispers of the shaitan, and let him not abandon actions just because the shaitan whispers to him. And we talked about the statement of Fudail yesterday when he said that whoever does an action, whoever leaves an action for someone else's sake, then this is showing off. And whoever does an action for someone else's sake, then this is shirk. Sometimes a person he normally prays a certain way. But when he's around other people, he leaves off praying that way because he doesn't want those people to think he's showing off. This is an act of showing off. When I'm praying alone, I usually recite a page and a half, 2 pages, 3 pages of Quran. But when I'm with the people, they're going to say I'm showing off if I recite 2 or 3 pages. So I'm only going to recite a small surah. This in itself is an act of showing off. Why? Because you did this action for other than the sake of Allah. You did this action for the sake of the people. Likewise, the opposite. A person who only recites small surahs by himself. But when he gets around the people, he says, no, if I only recite a small surah, now I got to recite 2 pages when I'm with the people now. We say this is an act of showing off. So it's not always showing off is that you're doing something, but showing off could also be that you're not doing something. So it's important that we pay attention to this and learn that sincerity is sincerity in doing things as well as in not doing things. قال المؤلف رحمه الله قال عبد الرحمن بن شريح من قام إلى شيء من الخير لا يريد إلا الله ثم عرض له من يريد أن يرائيه بذلك أعطاه الله بالأصل ووضع عنه الفزع. ومن قام إلى شيء من الخير لا يريد به إلا المراءة ثم فكر أو بدا له يحول آخر ذلك لله أعطاه الله الفزع ووضع عنه الأصل. This is a good statement by Shuraih, Abdul Rahman ibn Shuraih. He says, whoever stood to worship Allah with a certain act of good, and he only intends to worship Allah with that action, then in the midst of that action, something want to start showing off. He says Allah based on the origin of that action, and he won't hold him to account for what happened in the middle of that action. While on the other hand, if a person starts off showing off, and then they say, you know what, I need to make this action for the sake of Allah, Allah will give them what they made the action for in the middle of the action, and he won't hold them to account for what they started the action with. This is from the mercy of Allah. Let's set an example for this. Meaning that if a person does something for Allah, and then something happens that makes them start to show off, Allah will still give them the reward of what they originally started that action for. I.e., as long as they push away that showing off. And at the same time, if a person starts off showing off, but then says, you know what, I shouldn't be showing off with this action, let me do it for the sake of Allah only, Allah will give them the reward for the sake of Allah only and not hold them to account for the fact that they showed off in the beginning. So let's take an example. You're making salah in your home, right? Your father walks in. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim Maliki Yawmiddin Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. Right? You started off worshiping Allah, right? But then something happened that made you wanted to start show off. If your action, if you fall into this showing off, it destroys your action. But if this showing off comes up, it crosses your mind, oh, let me make my salat better for my dad. But you push it away and fight yourself from showing off, Allah gives you the reward for what you started your action for, and He doesn't hold you to account for whatever you might have fallen into from showing off. Right? Your father walks in the room and you make your qira'ah a little better. Why? Because you know your dad is going to say, why you reading like that? That's not how I taught you how to read. Recite the Quran, so I got to do it the way my dad told me to do it. But when you started that action, you started it for the sake of Allah. If that showing off starts to happen, but you fight it, then Allah gives you the reward for the action and doesn't hold you to account for the showing off. That's obvious. But from the mercy of Allah is that, let's say I started off showing off. My dad was watching me pray from the beginning. So I'm showing off in my alhamdulillah, I got husri going, right? I'm giving it the best I got. And as I'm praying, I think that, you know what, I shouldn't be showing off. I shouldn't make my action for my dad, I should make it for Allah. Allah will give you the reward of your sincerity and not hold you account for what you showed off, even though you started off showing off. So the purpose of this is how important sincerity is. That this sincerity will get your action accepted. قال المؤلف رحمه الله وهنا لا بد من توضيح الإشكال في أحاديث ربما توهم البعض أنها تنافي الإخلاص منها حديث أنس أن رجلا سأل النبي غنما بين جبلين فأعطاه إياه فأتى قومه فقال يا قوم أسلموا فوالله محمد يعطي عطاء ما يخاف الفقر فقال أنس إن كان الرجل ليسلم ما يريد إلا الدنيا فما يسلم حتى يكون الإسلام أحب إليه من الدنيا وما عليها. Here the author is going to tell us something very beneficial, just like what we talked about just now. A person starts off worshiping Allah and then something happens that makes him start to show off. If he pushes that showing off away, his action gets accepted. But what if a person starts off doing something for other than the sake of Allah? And then he starts doing it for the sake of Allah in the middle of that action. Does his action get accepted? He says this is something that we need to consider and pay attention to. He says because here there's something that we need to draw attention to that a lot of people make mistakes about it. And some of the people think that it goes against sincerity. A person starts off an action for other than the sake of Allah, but then does the action after starting it for other than Allah, he does the action only for Allah's sake. Is this action valuable? Does this action benefit him with Allah? The author, he mentions the hadith of Anas. He says that a man came to the Prophet and asked him to give him in between two mountains full of sheep. Between this mountain and that mountain, fill it up with sheep and give it to him. Right? So the Prophet gave it to him. So the man went back to his people and told his people, y'all need to go accept Islam. Because wallahi, Muhammad gives like he's not scared of poverty. So his people came and accepted Islam. Is their Islam accepted? Right? I'll give you a different example. The poor guy that comes to the masjid, right? The kafir. I make him eat after the other people eat. And then I tell him, you want food? You should accept Islam. If the kafir came and said, can you give me this food? And we gave him that food so he'd accept Islam. So he accepts Islam for the food, right? Is his Islam accepted? Huh? Right? Now let's say, if this is the case, what should I do? Should I even give him the food to begin with? He's only going to accept Islam for the food. Should I give him the food to begin with? Why? He's only going to accept it for the food. You said his Islam is not accepted. I don't care about the kafir. The only thing I care about the kafir is he accepts Islam. Right? If he's only going to accept Islam for the food, what's the purpose of giving him the food? Huh? It's not going to help him. This is where the mistake is. This is where the people make the mistake. This hadith, Anas says that the man asked for the sheep. And then he told his people, go accept Islam. Because Muhammad is giving away money like he's not scared of being broke. So his people accepted Islam. Right? Some of them might have accepted Islam for money. Right? But their Islam was accepted. Do we call them kafirs after that? No. We don't call them kafirs. They're Muslims. Right? Now, how good their Islam is between them and Allah. But look what happens. Anas said, after that hadith, that verily a person, you might have accepted Islam for the dunya, and then after he accepts Islam, Islam becomes more beloved to him than the dunya. How many people were like this? Most of us were like that. Right? How many of y'all chose to be a Muslim? Right? Everybody else was raised a Muslim. Right? You accepted Islam because your father told you you had to accept Islam. And if you would have left Islam while you were a child, your father would have put you out the house. Right? Worse, if you was in a different country, he might have killed you. Right? But you were a Muslim, I'm a Muslim. Somebody asked you when you was in grade school, you were a Muslim, I'm a Muslim. But nowadays, Islam is more beloved to you than everything else. Right? How many women accept Islam to get married? But then they end up becoming better than the man they married. Right? Maybe a person accepts Islam for a reason of the dunya, but then after that Islam becomes more beloved to him than the dunya itself. So this shows us that we shouldn't condemn the people for the reasons why they accepted Islam. We should use whatever means we can to get them to accept Islam. Because with the permission of Allah, Islam will become good afterwards. So just because, that person, he a munafiq, man. He only said La ilaha illallah so he could marry that sister. Right? A white guy, he only accepted Islam so he can get married to that Muslim girl. He's a Muslim now. Make him pray. Make him fast. Make him give charity. Because this is going to make his Islam better. You don't. That's the whole point. Exactly. That's the whole point. It's between them and Allah. So you don't judge them by their intention. You judge them by the action that they did. And even if the action that they did was for this evil intention, Allah will hold them to account. Right? من كان هجرته إلى الله ورسوله فهجرته إلى الله ورسوله ومن كانت هجرته لدنيا يصيبها أو امرأة ينكحها فهجرته إلى ما هاجر إليه. The Prophet said, whoever his hijrah was for Allah and his messenger, then his hijrah is to Allah and his messenger. And whoever his hijrah was for the dunya or for a woman to marry, then his hijrah is for whatever he made hijrah to. They both made hijrah. Do we say you didn't make hijrah, you're a hypocrite? No, we consider that they both made hijrah. Right? One of them, hijrah, was for Allah. The other one was for a woman. Even the guy who made hijrah for a woman, right? He didn't make hijrah for Allah. Does that mean that we should stop him from making hijrah or we should condemn him? No, because even in making that hijrah for the woman, it's still better for him, and perhaps he might be more righteous afterwards. Perhaps this might be a means that leads him to being righteous afterwards. Let's see what the author says. قال الوزير بن هبيرة قال المؤلف قال الوزير ابن هبيرة وفي هذا الحديث أيضا النهي عن التنقير عن مقاصد التائبين والإقناع منهم بما يظهرون ثم التلطف في غرس الإخلاص في قلوبهم بالتدريج والتعليم رجاء أن يصيروا إلى ما يحب المؤمن وقد لا يفطن إبليس لإفساد هذا التوصل الحسن لأن الشيطان يرى الإنسان من يسلم أو يتوب أو توبة من يتوب لملاحظة حال من الدنيا يوهن إسلام المسلم وتوبة التائب، فلا يحرص على إغواء المسلم أو تائب عن هذا الإسلام والتوبة المعروفين. ويرى العالم أن يغش حصولهما في قربهما منه بحيث تنالهما سهام الموعظة وتبلغهما قوارع التذكير وتبصيرهما الحق بعينه، فإذا بدا لهما الحق في كمال صورته وصباحة وجوهه عاد كل واحد منهما خصما للشيطان مخلصا في خصومته له، فحينئذ يرى الشيطان خسران صفقته في كونه رضي منهما بذلك الإسلام والتوبة الموسومين، راجيا أن يهلكهما بما جعله الله سبب فلاحهما. فهذا معنى قولنا وقد لا يفطن إبليس لإفساد هذا التوصل الحسن، وهذا دليل على أن الإسلام المسلم لعاجل الدنيا يسمى مسلما، ومثل هذا إن مات مهلة النظر فإن له ما للمسلمين. Wallahi, this statement right here is such a good statement. So the author said, explaining everything we just talked about, that sometimes a person will do something for a reason when it's not sincere for Allah. But we don't destroy that person right away. Instead, because we hope for that in the middle of his action, he'll make this action for Allah's sake. And if he does that, then Allah will give him the reward for that action. The author, he says that this hadith about the man who told his people to accept Islam because Muhammad is giving money away is the proof that we shouldn't we shouldn't like reprimand and chastise people for the intentions behind their tawbah. Right? You only making tawbah so you can get this money, or you're only making tawbah so you can go back to the masjid. You only became a Muslim so you can have a place to sleep in the winter, right? The guy, we all remember the one guy, what's his name, who used to come here a lot with the dreads. Sergio, right? He's only a Muslim so he can come to the masjid, right? Do we put him out the masjid? No, you got to let him stay in the masjid. We might think that his intention is only so he can have a place to sleep and only so he can have food to eat. But we let him still come to the masjid. We don't say, you're a hypocrite, go away. We don't rebuke him for his intentions because we don't know his intentions. What do? We continue to stay with him and we don't reprimand him, even though it might appear to us that his intentions aren't pure. Why is this the case? He says, the author, he says about the statement of Al-Wazir ibn Hubayrah, he says that, so this shows us that we shouldn't attack the people because of their intentions and why they did the things that they do. And we only hold them account for what they show us. We only hold the people accountable for what they show us. And then after that, like, so a person, he comes, he prays salat with us, right? What else can I say to him? He's making salat. But instead of just leaving him alone, what do? I become kind to him. And I try to plant Islam and sincerity into his heart, step by step. I try to do things that will teach him sincerity, step by step. Hoping that even though he might have accepted Islam just so he has a place to sleep, or just so he can get some food, or just so he can get some money, by me interacting with him good and trying to teach him sincerity, that maybe he'll start to love the same thing the rest of the believers love. So he accepted Islam so he could have a place to sleep. So we let him sleep in the masjid, and we try to teach him, and we try to be kind to him, and we try to teach him the way to be a Muslim. That maybe if Allah wants good for him, he'll allow Islam into his heart and make him a righteous person. Then the Al-Wazir, he goes on to say, and indeed, the shaitan is he's normally tricked by this type of Islam. Right? What do we mean by that statement? قَالْ لَا يَفْتِنُ الشَّيْطَانِ أو الإبليس لإفساد هذا التوصل. Like maybe Iblis might not pay attention to this type of Muslim. And this is beneficial for us. Right? The shaitan, what kind of person does the shaitan bother? Huh? The more and more you're righteous, the more and more the shaitan's going to put effort into you. Right? A person who's going to smoke and drink anyway, is the shaitan going to bother them to tell them smoke and drink? They're going to do it anyway. I don't need to waste my time with them. But the person who's not going to smoke and drink, shaitan's going to say, why don't you smoke? Why don't you drink? Why don't you take a girlfriend? Right? Because he needs to mislead you. So maybe this person who accepted Islam for worldly benefits, the shaitan might pay no attention to him. Why is this the case? Because the shaitan thinks, oh, he only accepted Islam for the worldly benefits. He only made tawbah for worldly benefits. So this isn't going to benefit him with Allah. So I'll leave him alone. And I'll busy myself with someone else. And therefore, since the shaitan left him alone and now gives you the opportunity to work with this individual and teach him iman and teach him sincerity when the shaitan is not paying attention to him. And this makes this person even maybe more suitable to receive it. And then later on become an enemy of shaitan because of how the shaitan left him alone at first. So this is the type of mindset we should have with people who we think that they're only doing something not sincerely for Allah. Does it mean we reprimand them and blame them? No, we act with them the way that they show us. If a person's praying, what do we say about him? He's a Muslim. He made salah, he says la ilaha illallah, he's a Muslim. Yeah, but he only said la ilaha illallah because, he don't pray. When he don't pray, like he only said he wanted to marry my sister. And my father said only a Muslim can marry my sister. So he accepted Islam right then and there on the spot and said ashhadu an la, and now he wants to pray. He don't know nothing. He a hypocrite, man. No, inshallah, we don't know his intention. How do we act with him? He's a Muslim. And maybe the shaitan will leave this person alone. Because the shaitan thinks the same thing you did. He's a hypocrite. I don't need to waste my time. But this is when you take the opportunity to teach this person iman. Teach him sincerity. Teach him to love the things that the Muslims love. And perhaps Allah will enter Islam and iman into the heart of this person. Now, if Allah enters Islam and iman in the heart of this person, does he have to say the shahada again? Because he was already a Muslim. Right? So Allah will give him the sincerity and not hold him to account for that period when he might have not have been sincere. And this is something that's important. And if a person dies in this state where we're not sure if they were sincere or not sincere, we treat them the same way we treat the other Muslims. So the whole point behind all of this statement of the book so far is about how sincerity, Allah looks at our sincerity and gives it great concern. So if you start your action for the sake of Allah, and then something comes that makes you kind of show off or do something in the middle, as long as you fight that feeling, Allah still accepts your action, which is easy, right? But even better than that, if you start off doing something for other than Allah, I started off praying for someone other than Allah. I was praying so my wife would see me. I was praying so such and such would see me and say, oh, Muhammad's righteous, I'm going to marry him, my daughter. That's the only reason I was praying to begin with. Right? I only came to the masjid so I can marry that girl. Even if you start off an action for other than the sake of Allah, as long as you make that action for Allah's sake only, somewhere in it, Allah will still accept that action from you, inshallah. Just like the people who accept Islam for a worldly purpose, and then they make their Islam good, and then Allah accepts their Islam from them. There's the one Sahabi who told the Prophet, if you beat me in wrestling, I'll accept Islam. There's the one Sahabi who wanted to marry the other woman, a Sahabi woman, and she said, no until you accept Islam. So he accepted Islam. Do we say that Sahabi is a hypocrite? He only accepted Islam to marry that woman? We say it doesn't matter why you accept Islam. Accept Islam. Right? The best person is the one who accepts Islam because of Tawheed, because of La ilaha illallah. Right? But whatever gets them inside the house, get them inside the house. And then once they get inside the house and they feel the air conditioning and they see the food spread out, they're going to want to be a Muslim. So let's get the people to become Muslims and then work on everything that comes after that. And this is not to say that the people who accept Islam because of Tawheed aren't better, and the reason why they accepted Islam, because the best reason a person accepts Islam is Tawheed. But if a person does it for the dunya and then makes his Islam good after that, then this is still just as good because the goal is accomplished. He's a good Muslim, and that's what we want from the people. That's why Anas said, "In kana ar-rajul la yuslimu ما يريد إلا الدنيا فما يسلم حتى يكون الإسلام أحب إليه من الدنيا وما عليها. And it said that maybe a person accepts Islam only for the dunya, and then once he accepts Islam, it becomes more beloved to him than the dunya and everything in it. And then lastly, we still got a little bit more. The author goes on to say, وكما أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم تألف الأعراب بما أعطاه من غنم فإن الأنبياء من قبله كانوا يحركون الناس بالدنيا إلى الدين. قال تعالى النور فقلت استغفروا ربكم إنه كان غفارا يرسل السماء عليكم مدرارا ويمددكم بأموال وبنين ويجعل لكم جنات ويجعل لكم أنهارا. قال قتادة علم أن القوم أصحاب الدنيا فحركهم به ليؤمنوا به. This is another example of this. The author, he says that the same way the Prophet used to encourage people to accept Islam by bringing their hearts closer to Islam by giving them money or giving them property or giving them things, and this is the same way the previous prophets used to do. Right? So for instance, Noah, he told his people to accept Islam. And what did he promise his people when they accept Islam? فَقُلْتُ اسْتَغْفِرُوا رَبَّكُمْ. Right? I told them to forgive, to ask Allah for forgiveness. Verily He forgives. يُرْسِلِ السَّمَاءَ عَلَيْكُمْ فَقُلْتُ اسْتَغْفِرُوا رَبَّكُمْ يُرْسِلِ السَّمَاءَ عَلَيْكُمْ مِدْرَارًا. Allah will allow the sky to rain abundantly upon you. Allah will allow you to grow crops very well. Right? وَيُمْدِدَكُمْ بِأَمْوَالٍ. And He'll give you money and children, and He'll make for you gardens and make for you rivers. If you accept Islam, this is what Allah is going to give you. Allah is going to give you money. Allah is going to give you children. Allah is going to give you wealth. He's going to give you provisions. Accept Islam, Allah is going to give all that to you. Can I give this type of dawah? Can I try to get a person to accept Islam so they can be rich? This is what the prophets used to do. Accept Islam, Allah is going to take care of you. If you accept Islam, Allah, believe in Allah, Allah is going to take care of you. Accept Islam, Allah forgive you your sins. Right? He'll make your life easy. These are asalib of dawah. These are ways of giving dawah. If the person accepts Islam, do I say, oh, he only accepted Islam so he could be rich? No, he accepted Islam. Now let's teach him Islam and teach him to love Allah. And if Allah wants good for him, He'll make him rich. This is the way that the prophets used to be in their dawah. Right? Qatada, he said that Nuh knew about his people that they loved the dunya. So he encouraged them to accept Islam by enticing them with the dunya. If you know that the people are loving the dunya, you know it's a homeless person, use this as a means to give him dawah. But with sincerity for Allah. Right? Look, I can accept Islam. You know, wallahi, I was poor like you. And then I accepted Islam, Allah got me a house, I got a job, I got clean, I got money, I got friends. Wallahi, when I was a kafir, I was the brokest person I knew. I didn't have a dime. I was humiliated. I didn't have too many friends. No girls would look at me. I mean, I was just ashamed. I accepted Islam, not for those reasons, but I got all of those things now. I got a wife, I got kids, I got a house, I got, alhamdulillah, you know, people see me and they smile. People are friendly with me. People shake my hand and like to know me. All of this is from Islam. So why not accept Islam if this is the things that you want? These are the means of giving dawah. The author, he goes on to say, تَجُوزُ إِضَافَةُ الْأَعْمَالِ الْبِرِّ إِلَى أَرْبَابِهَا. Before going into this, one more thing to understand about the wisdom behind being able to do this is because everybody does everything for one of two reasons. Everything you do is for one of two reasons. It's to get some benefit or to push away some harm. This is why Allah encourages you the same way. Did Allah just tell you to pray? He told you to pray because of what? If you pray, what do you get? Jannah, taqwa, right? If you don't pray, what happens? You go to hell. The only reason you're praying is for what? I want Jannah. I don't want to go to hell. Do we say you're not sincere? Like the Sufis, this is what they say. They say it doesn't matter what Allah gives me. If I go to hell, then that's okay because that's what Allah wanted to give me. And I just want whatever Allah gives me. Yeah, this is what they say. That's why like the Sufis, the extreme of it, like when they go to their sheikh will throw poop at them. And say, if you really love me, you'll love my poop. Does that make sense? No, right? They say that if you want to get, it doesn't matter what Allah gives you. right? If you really love Allah, right? If you really love a girl, right? She gives you a kiss. Are you happy? You excited, right? Or she smacks you in the face. You say, at least she touched me, right? This is how they say you should feel about Allah. It doesn't matter if Allah put you in heaven or hell. He gave you something, right? We say, la. The balanced Muslim, what he likes is that he gets the gift of Allah and stays away from his punishment. So this is why Allah encouraged you this way, right? Worship me, I'll give you Jannah. If you don't worship me, you're going to get punished in the hell. So the human being is driven by this love and this fear, this hope and this, this threat. So this is why it's okay to encourage people with the dunya to accept Islam. Accept Islam. Wallahi, akhi, Allah's going to take care of you. Wallahi, akhi, make tawbah. Allah forgive you your sins. Don't have a girlfriend, akhi. Wallahi, make tawbah. Allah give you a wife better than her. Right? Is he accepting this? Is he making tawbah just to get a wife better than her? Wallahi, if you make tawbah, Allah give you a wife like, whoever is the kafir woman that everybody like. You know what I mean? Allah give you a wife like her. Beautiful like her. I'm going to accept Islam for that. Why not? Right? This will make a person a better Muslim, then let that be the reason. Because ain't I practicing Islam? Aren't you practicing Islam for a hura'in? Ain't that what you want? You want a woman in paradise, right? That's why I make salat. Why you make salat? I make salat to make Allah happy so He can give me wives in paradise and gardens and rivers and fruits and honey. So it's okay to entice the people with these things to accept Islam, and it doesn't mean that we're attacking their sincerity. Indeed, this is from the reasons why Islam has more people accepting it than other religions. When you look at Christians, they don't know what's in paradise. You ask a Christian what's in paradise, they say we're going to stand there and pray all day, right? We're going to sing hymn, we're going to chime in paradise all day. Do you want to go to that paradise, or do you want to go to the paradise where there's liquor and women and gardens and gold and riches, right? This is the paradise you want, right? And then what's better than that? Looking at Allah. When you start to understand the benefit of Islam and you start to love what the believers love, you understand why the best reward is the fact that you get to look at Allah. Right? Because you're sincerely in love with Allah. You sincerely have that ikhlas, even though you started off, I just want the Jannah. Right? I just want a woman who when I look at her, I can look at her for 40 years long. You know what I mean? But after that you understand that you know what? No. Looking at Allah is better. Right? The reward, the pleasure of Allah is better. And then the dunya doesn't matter anymore. I accepted Islam so I can get $100. But after I accepted Islam, I didn't need the $100. So these are just some things to think about giving dawah. The author goes on to say, وَتَجُوزُ إِضَافَةُ أَعْمَالِ الْبِرِّ إِلَى أَرْبَابِهَا وَلَيْسَ ذَلِكَ بِقَادِهٍ فِي إِخْلَاصِهِمْ ففي الصحيحين من حديث ابن عمر وفيه قول مسجد بني زريق وبوب عليه البخاري باب جواز قول مسجد بني فلان. وقال الحافظ ابن ملقن وليس إضافة المسجد إلى بني زريق إضافة تمليك وإنما هي إضافة تمييز. وتحسين العمل كذلك إن قصد به إتقان العمل لا رياء كطاعة وقربة. فالنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لما أخبر أبا موسى الأشعري رضي الله عنه بسروره وإعجابه بقراءته قال أبو موسى الأشعري لو أعلم أنك تستمع لقراءتي لحبرته لك تحبيرا. وكذلك جودة التحضير للدروس إذا كان الشيخ محتسبا على أنها عبادة ويبذل أقصى جهده لتبليغ شرع الله ورفع الجهل عن المسلمين فهذا عمل صالح. وإن قصد الرياء وإن قصد الرياء وأن يقال عالم فهذا أول ما تسعر بهم النار يوم القيامة كما جاء في صحيح مسلم من حديث أبي هريرة ولكن مع جيد. So now we understand some basic principles, right? Allah considers our intention more than He considers other things. This is what Allah looks at from us. Allah looks at our heart and our sincerity. Maybe we're doing the same action, but it's our intention that will separate, right? And we should try to keep our actions secret so that we don't fall into showing off. But if we show our actions for a beneficial reason, it's okay, like so other people would follow us. And if I do an action for Allah and then start to show off in the middle as long as I fight that showing off, Allah accepts my action. And if I start an action for showing off, but I make it for Allah in the middle, Allah makes that action and accepts it from me. Now we got a question. If it's okay for us to show our actions sometimes, but we should keep it hidden, is it okay for us to, mention the righteous actions of other people? Like, can I say like Muhammad, the one who pray all the time, right? Or does this attack his sincerity? It's no problem with doing that, right? I say, Muhammad, the one who's always in the masjid, right? Does this attack his sincerity? We say, no, this doesn't affect the sincerity of his action, the fact that I describe him by being known as one who's always in the masjid. Or the one, like they used to say about Fudayl al-Iyab, Abid al-Haramain, the worshipper of the two masjids. Right? This doesn't attack a person's sincerity, that you attribute their righteous actions to them. Just like in the hadith, when the Prophet ﷺ talked about Masjid Bani Ruzayq, he described the masjid as being the masjid of the tribe of so-and-so. Not because they owned it, but because this was the masjid that they were always at. So were they going to the masjid just so that the people could know they went to that masjid? They say no. So their sincerity is fine, and there's no problem with describing them like that. I say Saddam, the real righteous brother Saddam, not the other Saddam. No, the righteous Saddam, the one who makes salat all the time. Not Hussein, but Muhammad Saddam, the one who's in the masjid all the time. Right? Is it okay for me to describe him like this and make him recognized by this? It's okay because his sincerity is not affected by that. Likewise, is it okay to make my action better for other people? Like we gave the example earlier, Muhammad was in the house and he was praying. And his father walked in, and so he started making his recitation better. Is this okay? Huh? It's okay if a person does it as an act of obedience for Allah. It's okay to make your actions better when other people are around if you're doing that for the sake of Allah. For example, Muhammad was reciting, he was making salah. But when his father walked in, he started reciting better so his father could see how to recite better. Right? Right? His father recited, right? So Muhammad, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. His father walks in, now he's going to be perfect in his recitation. So his father can hear a perfect recitation and learn it. Or he can take the example of it, right? Or he can, like if a kafir walks by, right? When we talk to a kafir, we recite an ayat of the Quran to them. How do I recite the ayat? Alhamdulillah, Allah said, do we recite the ayat to the kafir like that? How do we recite the ayat to the kafir? أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Right, so the kafir can hear how beautiful it sounds. Right? Is that showing off for the kafir? Why not? Because you're making it beautiful so the kafir can hear how beautiful it sounds. You're making it beautiful for the sake of Allah. So you did this action only because somebody else is there, but you did it for the sake of Allah. So it's not always showing off just because other people are around. It's about what your intention is. If I'm making my recitation beautiful just so such and such can hear me and say, oh, Muhammad can recite real well, mashallah. Khalid, mashallah, he makes his ruku really long, mashallah. Right? If that's the reason I'm doing it, then my action is no good. But if I'm reciting good, or I'm making my ruku long and my sujood long for the sake of Allah, and so the people can learn how to make sujood correctly, right? We say, alhamdulillah, it's okay to do that, right? Why do we make dhikr out loud after the salah? Are we showing off? We're doing this because this is the sunnah and to teach the people how to make dhikr. If nobody's around, I still make dhikr out loud, but if nobody's around, sometimes you don't make dhikr out loud, right? Some scholars say if you're praying by yourself, you don't have to recite Surah Al-Fatiha in a loud voice. Right? In Fajr and things like that, if you're praying by yourself, you can recite it in a soft voice. Right? Is it showing off when other people come around that we raise our voice with it? Now we say, no, this is the way you're supposed to do it. I got to give a khutbah. So I put I'm going to make this khutbah off the chain. there's this ayah, I'm going to put this ayah. And there's this hadith, I'm going to make this khutbah off the chain. When I'm done with this khutbah, the people are going to say, mashallah. Is Is that okay? Huh? It depends on why you're doing it. If you're doing it so that the people can learn the religion and it has an effect, so when they hear the khutbah they say, MashaAllah, we need to worship Allah more, and I'm trying to make them worship Allah more for the sake of Allah, go for it. But if I'm making the khutbah really good just so they can say, oh, that was a good khutbah out there, Hakeem, way to go, then I don't get anything from it. Right? So if a person makes his action better for the sake of Allah when the other people are around, then this is not showing off. You did the action for the sake of Allah for the other people. Right? So this is why, an example of this is when the Prophet ﷺ, he said to Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, when he heard him reciting the Quran, and he liked the way he recited it. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari said, if I known you were listening, I'd have made it even better. If I know you was listening, I'd have recited, I'd have made it so beautiful for you. Right? Was Abu Musa al-Ash'ari showing off? No, but he wanted to allow the Prophet to hear the extent of how beautiful his recitation could be. This isn't showing off, because he would have did it for the sake of Allah, but he would have allowed the Prophet to hear it. Right? So is it showing off to compete in the Quran competition? Right? The person who wins the Ramadaan competition, is he showing off with his answers? Right? As long as his intention is that I'm going to learn and benefit, and I'm going to compete with the brothers to encourage them, to make them want to do the competition also, then this is not showing off. He asked the question for the people that were here earlier. If he thinks he's showing off, should he just quit? What's the answer? We just talked about this. A person is worshiping Allah. Then the shaitan comes to him and says, man, you showing off. You might as well just quit. What should he do? You should fight it off. And don't worry about showing off. Continue the action. Because to leave an action because of the people is showing off. If I'm making salat, right? I came into the masjid, nobody's in the masjid, right? And I'm praying, right? I'm praying good. I mean, long ruku, long sujood, good qira'ah. It's the middle of the night, you know what I mean? I'm making i'tikaf, I'm reciting real good, and I'm alone, right? Then somebody walks in. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. I don't want them to see right? That's showing off. How did I show off? I didn't do anything. By leaving off that action, you were showing off. Because now what the people going to say? Oh, he's righteous. You know, he doesn't want nobody to know his righteous actions. Which is showing off. So you don't worry about the people at all. The only thing you think about when you're worshiping Allah should be what? Should be what? I'm asking him. What should be the only thing you think about when you're worshiping Allah? Allah. Huh? Was he showing off? If he was showing off, then your deed's not accepted. Right? Riyah shirk asghar, it makes the action useless. Right? But if he fights it and tries to push it away, then inshallah his action will be accepted. That's what we just mentioned. That if a person starts off the action sincerely and then he starts to show off but fights it, Allah will still accept the action from him. Right? Right, but then you say, you know what? No, I'm going to go to the masjid anyway. I don't care who sees me. That's not showing off, right? Or you say, I'm going to go to the masjid, right? Oh man, I ain't been to the masjid in 2 days, right? Or I was just there at Maghrib. If I don't go for Isha, everybody going to say, oh, he came for the food, but he didn't come back for Maghrib and Tarawih. I mean, for Isha and Tarawih. So I got to go back now, right? If that's the reason you're doing it, that's showing off, right? We'll tell the person, go ahead, still go though. Because maybe when you get there, what happened? Well, I'm here now, I might as well pray Tarawih. I was just coming for Isha, but let me pray Tarawih too for the sake of Allah. Right? So now an action that you started off showing off is now an action of sincerity. And maybe on the way, you say, you know what? I don't even know why I wasn't going to go to the masjid anyway. Like this happens, right? This happens to me sometimes. I come to the masjid, I'm tired from the day I was doing something. I shoot to the masjid for Maghrib. And I go home. And I'm like, man, I'm tired. I'm not going to go to the masjid. Then I say, man, but if I don't go to the masjid, everybody's going to say, Hakeem was just here, now he ain't at the masjid. So now I got to go to the masjid. Then I say, well, you know what? If I go to the masjid, I'm just going to be showing off, so I might as well not go to the masjid. But now that's showing off too, because I'm leaving the action. All of this is for the people. Everything I'm doing is because of the people. Right? So what do? I say, you know what, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, I seek refuge from Allah, and I go to the masjid. Why? Not for the people, not because somebody will say he came to the masjid, or if I didn't go, somebody say, oh, he didn't come to the masjid. But I got to fight myself and do it only for Allah. Even though these reasons crept up in my intention, I have to push them away. And if I push them away, then my action is sincere, inshallah. So don't do an action for people and don't leave off an action for people. Make your actions sincerely for Allah. And even if you make your actions better when the people are around, then make it better for the sake of Allah. I'm going to make my recitation good, right? So that the Hafiz can say, good job, Muhammad. No, so that the Hafiz can, so that Allah can give me, like, why do I recite slow? Because I want everybody to hear how good my recitation is. My recitation crappy, right? But I recite slow because on the day of judgment, Allah will say, recite Quran and ascend in paradise. And don't stop ascending until you stop reciting. And so the people who recite it slow, they'll ascend more because their recitation will be slower. So I recite slow for that reason, because I get a reward for this. So now, if it's time to pray Maghrib, and it's iftar time, and everybody wants, come on, we ready to eat. So I say, you know what, the people hungry, I'm going to recite fast for them today. I done just showed off. Right? Because I'm used to reciting in a slow way for Allah. So I'm not going to change my action for the people. But if I change it for the people, well, maybe I'm going to recite a small surah because there's weak people behind me, and the Prophet used to make the salat shorter when there were weak people behind him. So I'm going to consider the people, and I'm going to make the salat shorter for their sake, for the sake of Allah. Right? I did that action to consider the people, but I did it for the sake of Allah. So that's not showing off either. Lastly, let's go ahead and try to finish this before iftar. We don't got that much time. I wanted to finish this dars, but this, like I said, this lesson was so long. Lastly, the author says, لكن مع هذا ينبغي للعبد أن يتحفظ ويسد كل طريقة قد يفسد النية. فإن القلب قد يكون صحيحا لا تزال ترد عليه الواردات والخواتر حتى ربما شاب النية شائبة خفية فالسعيد من احتاط لدينه. قال أبو عبد الله الأنطاكي اجتمع الفضيل والثوري فتذاكروا فرق سفيان وبكى ثم قال أرجو أن يكون هذا المجلس علينا رحمة وبركة. فقال له الفضيل لكني يا أبا عبد الله أخاف أن لا يكون أضر علينا منه. ألست تخلصت إلي أحسن حديثك وتخلصت أنا إليك أحسن حديثي فتزينت لي وتزينت لك. فبكى سفيان وقال أحييتني يا أحييتني أحياك الله. قال ربيع بن الصبي كنا عند الحسن فوعظ فانتحب رجل فقال حسن أما والله ليسألنك الله يوم القيامة ما أردت بهذا. وأنا الحسن البصري قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ما عبد يخطب خطبة إلا والله سائله عنها يوم القيامة ما أراد بها. فكان مالك إذا حدث بهذا الحديث بكى حتى ينقطع ثم يقول تحسبون أن عيني تقر بكلامي عليكم وأنا أعلم أن الله سائل عنه يوم القيامة ما أردت به. قال سفيان الثوري البكاء 10 أجزاء جزء لله و9 لغير الله فإذا جاء الذي لله في العام مرة فهو كثير أحيانا جي. We only got one more. Oh no, still a lot after this. SubhanAllah. Right. So the author rahimahullah, he says that so after we understand all of this, then it's still important that we pay attention. Can somebody with the dates and everything set up? Should we stop so we can set it up or? So he says that it's important that we still pay attention to not allowing the shaitan to trick us in our intentions. Right? The believer protects his intentions in all ways. Like we say, he doesn't do something for the people. He doesn't not do something for the people. He protects his intentions from all aspects. And he guards it from allowing anything to enter into it. Anytime something other than Allah creeps into his intention, he protects himself. And then he mentions some of the statement of the Salaf about this. He says, قال Abu Abdullah al-Antaki, Fudayl and Thawri, right? Two of the tabi'een, from the highest tabi'een, Sufyan al-Thawri wa Fudayl ibn Iyad, right? Fudayl and al-Thawri gathered together and they started reminding each other. Right? This is something the Salaf used to do that we don't do that much. They used to just talk and remind each other about Allah. Right? They would mention hadith to soften your heart. You'd mention a hadith to me to soften my heart. And instead of talking about the game, and talking about the weather, they would just talk about Allah with each other to soften each other's heart. فَتَذَاكَرُوا. So they reviewed with each other and reminded each other. So Sufyan felt it, right? It affected him. He felt soft in his heart and he began to cry. And then he said to Fudayl, I hope that Allah will make this gathering for us a way of blessing and mercy. Right? You mentioned hadith to me, I mentioned hadith to you. I started to cry because of how good it was. May Allah make this a form of blessing and mercy for us. But Fudayl said to him, as for me, then I'm worried that this gathering will be more dangerous for us than beneficial. I'm worried that this gathering will cause us more harm than benefit. So he said, how is that? He said, when you came to talk to me, didn't you take the best hadith you could get to tell me them? And I took the best hadith I had to tell you. So you made yourself beautiful for me and I made myself beautiful for you. So Sufyan began to cry even more. And he said, you've given me life, may Allah give you life. Meaning that we need to pay attention to our sincerity in everything, right? We need to be worried about the fact that every time I do a good action, I might be showing off with it. So let me try harder to protect my sincerity with Allah. Likewise, Ar-Rabi' ibn Subayh, he said that we were with Hassan al-Basri, also from the major tabi'een. And he was admonishing the people. He was giving them a maw'idha. So one of the people moaned and screamed intahaba, mama intahaba, passed out, cried. He began to cry because of the admonition that that Hassan was giving them. And so Hassan said to him, Wallahi, Allah is going to ask you why you crying on the day of judgment. Right? Were you crying for the sake of Allah, or were you crying for the people could say, oh mashallah, you see, how many times we see, oh, you want to hear this recitation when the Qadi cries? Right? You want to hear this recitation? Oh, so he's going to cry in this recitation. Did you ever hear Shaykh, Fulan, you ever hear Shaykh Uthmaan cry? Right? And we start to show off with it. So we have to protect our intentions. Likewise in Hassan al-Basri, he says that no servant prepares a statement except that Allah is going to ask him about that statement on the day of judgment, right? I get up to give a khutbah. He says, no, ma min abd yakhtibu khutbatan. No servant gives a khutbah except Allah is going to ask him on the day of judgment, what was he really intending? Were you trying to show off with your khutbah how good you are, how eloquent you are, how good your words come together, how much sense you make? Or were you doing it for Allah? And so when Imam Malik used to tell this hadith to the people, he would begin to cry. Right? And so he says, maybe you all think I'm crying because of how much I agree with this statement. You know what I mean? How much this statement affected me. And I'm really crying because I know that Allah is going to ask me about it on the day of judgment. Does that make sense? Maybe you all think I'm crying because of how great this statement is. I'm going to be asked about Allah, so I got fear in my heart, and so I'm really scared of Allah, so I'm crying now. So that's why you all think I'm crying. But in reality, I know that I'm crying because I know Allah is going to ask me about why I'm crying. I'm crying because I'm worried about, am I really sincere for Allah or not? And then lastly, he says that Sufyan al-Thawri, he said that there's 10 types of crying. One of them is for the sake of Allah, and the other 9 are not. And if you get the type that happens for the sake of Allah once in a year, then that's something that's good. And then we'll just summarize the rest of this. وَأَحْيَانًا قَدْ يُشْعِرُ الْإِنسَانُ بِبَعْضِ مَا يَرَاهُ وَيُشَاهِدُهُ أَنَّهُ يَتَكَلَّفُ في تحسين ظاهره مما قد لا يتوافق مع باطنه. وقد تكلم الحافظ ابن رجب الحنبلي رحمه الله في شأن من يتعاطى الخشوع ظاهرا مجردا صورة دون حصوله حقيقة، فقال ومتى تكلف الإنسان تعاطى الخشوع في جوارحه وأطرافه مع فراغ قلبه من الخشوع وخلوه منه كان ذلك خشوع النفاق، وهو الذي كان السلف يستعيذون منه، كما قال بعضهم استعيذ بالله من خشوع النفاق، فقال وما خشوع النفاق؟ قال أن ترى الجسد خاشعا والقلب ليس بخاشع، فمن أظهر خشوعا غير ما في قلبه فإنما هو نفاق على نفاق، والنية قد يحتف بها من القرائن ما قد يفصح عنها، فهذا النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لما اعتكف بادرت إحدى نساؤه فضربت لها خباء في المسجد لتعتكف، فتبعتها سائر النساء النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فضربنا أخبية لهن فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم البر أردتن والسلف مع الصلاح بواطنهم كانوا يهتمون نياتهم. قال شعبة ما شيء أخوف عندي من أن يدخلني النار من الحديث. قال الحافظ الذهبي معلقا على هذا كل من حقق نفسه في صحة نيته في طلب العلم يخاف مثل هذا ويود أن ينجو كفافا. We can't finish. We don't got time to finish. هذا وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. We'll finish these last pages with lesson 4 tomorrow, which is dhikr, which it doesn't look like we'll finish either. That's why we all got to learn Arabic so we can finish a lesson today, inshallah. It's like 4 or 5 pages, but translation takes too long. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. Is there any questions about what we talked about today? The khulasa of everything, if we don't remember nothing else, is just remember that sincerity, we should try hard to make our actions sincere for Allah, and that means not doing something for other than Allah, or not leaving something off for other than Allah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.